Hello and welcome to Lesson 7 of the Elizabeth I GCSE lessons, this one focusing on Mary, Queen of Scots. For this lesson you will need to be on page 28 of your lesson notes booklet that looks quite a lot like this. And before we get started in today's lesson, and this might sound a bit daft and it might sound rather simplistic, but it's important to note because it's a mistake that students make many times. Mary, Queen of Scots was not the same person as Mary the First. Mary the First was Elizabeth's half-sister. Mary, Queen of Scots was her cousin. That is very, very important to remember. Lots of students make mistakes by confusing Mary, Queen of Scots with Mary the First. They are different people. They were different people. They were both very Catholic, and they were both called Mary, but they were not the same person. This lesson will focus on the relationship between Elizabeth I and Mary, how that relationship deteriorated over time, and how Mary posed a threat to Elizabeth, and how that threat grew over time. Okay, this first section of the lesson is going to focus on why Mary, Queen of Scots, had a claim to the throne. You can see from this family tree here that she was Elizabeth's second cousin, and they shared Henry VII, as in Elizabeth's case her grandfather, in Mary's case her great-grandfather. So Mary's claim to the throne was quite strong. You are going to use the first excerpt from the textbook, which is in your lessons note booklet. I want you to read that, and then underneath it asks you the question, why did Mary have a claim to the throne? So read this page and underneath answer that question, why did Mary have a claim to the throne, so you understand the background to it. I'm going to pause now and do that task. Alright, the next part of this lesson, and the major part of this lesson, is looking at the documentary, which you can find the link to in the lesson notes booklet. I want you to watch this documentary in its entirety. It lasts for 57 minutes. And I want you to watch it, and I want you to think about what happens to Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots' relationship over time. What is it that causes that relationship to sour to the point that Elizabeth eventually, we skip ahead here, we paint the big picture first before we look at the detail later. What prompts Elizabeth eventually to actually agree to the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots? So watch the clip, and the space in your lesson notes booklet for you to jot down why it was that this relationship deteriorated over time between Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots. Okay, what you should really have got a sense from watching that documentary is how much Elizabeth struggled with what she should do with Mary. And what we want to focus on now, towards the end of this lesson, is why it was that Mary posed such a problem for Elizabeth after she arrived in England. You should have seen from that documentary, and you're about to see from some of the reading that you're going to do, that Mary herself was made some fairly unwise decisions, was quite reckless in her personal relationships, and put herself in some serious difficulty where she had to rely on Elizabeth. Elizabeth, however, couldn't bring herself for a long time, and certainly couldn't bring herself to do this in the late 1560s and 1570s, which we're dealing with now. Couldn't bring herself to get rid of Mary, couldn't bring herself to order her execution, felt a sense of loyalty to her, a sense of sisterhood. And this brings us right the way back to the first lesson that we looked at, this sense of the divine right of monarchs. And Elizabeth feels that she has the divine right to rule, and Mary, as an anointed queen, has the God-given right to rule as well. And who is Elizabeth to take that away from her? It also links, I think, to one of the other problems that we identified that Elizabeth had back in lesson 2 of this sequence of lessons, which is the problem of gender. Elizabeth can see that Mary, as a woman, has been badly treated, has had a terrible time in the relationships that she's had, and has been exploited and has been damaged by those relationships. And as a fellow woman, I think Elizabeth has sympathy with Mary, Queen of Scots also, which is maybe why she hesitates to act in a decisive way for so long. What I want you to do, therefore, now is read the information which is in your lesson notes booklet about why it is that Mary poses such a problem to Elizabeth, especially after she arrives in England. And I want you to jot down some key points in relation to that question. So you're going to pause now and have a go at that task. Okay, so what you should really have got a sense from in that reading, what you should have not noted down, is that Elizabeth's kind of stuck with Mary. Once she arrives in England, she doesn't feel like she wants to hand her back to the Scottish Lords because she thinks she's been badly treated by them. She doesn't really want to send her abroad somewhere. She certainly doesn't want to make her heir to the throne. And she doesn't want to execute or kill her. Elizabeth doesn't feel like she can do that. Despite the fact that many people in Parliament think that the sooner Mary, Queen of Scots, is out of the way, the better. So, really, Mary's presence in England is a festering problem for Elizabeth. And I mentioned in the last lesson about how Mary, Queen of Scots, comes to personify, comes to be the person around which all of Elizabeth's problems seem to swirl, and that really is Mary's role from this point on. As we're going to see in next lesson with the Northern Rebellion, her presence in England makes Catholics think that they can depose Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne, and going forward, other people in England, Catholic powers, but also foreign powers, feel as though Mary is somebody who can be a replacement for Elizabeth, and so therefore she becomes the focal point for threats to Elizabeth. So there we have it. That's the end of this lesson 7, which focused on Mary, Queen of Scots, and what's really important is Mary's role going forward and Mary's role in the Northern Rebellion, which is the focus of lesson 8. So until then, ta-ta for now.